I'm optimistic on A&M winning only because I think I'm not ready to accept the fact that if we lose to Auburn, who else are we going to lose to?
Yeah.
And I don't mean that as a knock to you
No,
guys
I
at
know
all.
exactly what you mean. SEC play is finally upon us. The Auburn Tigers have made it through non-conference play, the majority of it, but now we move into the real grind, SEC conference play. And who better to start it with than the Texas A&M Aggies? And I should say, no tougher opponent to start it with, especially when we're going to Kyle Field. Speaking of Kyle, I'm your host, Kyle Loomis, here at E2C Network, where we share the Auburn experience. I could share my thoughts about this game, and I'm certainly will do that throughout the week as we head up to game time. But sometimes it's better to get a perspective from across the sideline and understand what's going through their minds on a week with this matchup. And so we have welcomed in someone with that perspective today, Robert Behrens of SB Nation, Good Bull Hunting, covers the Texas A&M Aggies for football, baseball, basketball, and I'm sure much more. Welcome to the show.
Absolutely, man. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for being willing to sit down with an Auburn Tiger fan. You know, I know there's not much animosity that's been built up between our two fan bases or two sides that much. In fact, I would say this. I have found it to be Texas A&M fans and just that community as a whole to be one of the nicer of the SEC thus far. So I want to commend who you associate with on that at least, because I've had a pretty good experience with them.
No, that's good. That's good to hear. I mean, I think that's generally something we try to pride ourselves on is trying to be, a big like loud environment, but also like a relatively welcoming environment, especially for visitors and like because like yeah, you want to make it hard on the other team, but it's not about making it hard on the other fans because we're all just there to have a good time.
Yeah, we could send that message over to a few other fan bases out there that could get that. Yeah, we try our best.
Colorado.
Colorado.
Yeah.
I was going to say Alabama. I was going to say LSU. You know, we could keep going down the list. Everybody's got their bad ones, but look, you know, what I do know is that Texas A&M tends to have not just a great brand of football, but a great persona about them as well. And I hope that the Auburn Tigers have maintained that as well too on y'all's end. I want to get into this game, but first, I would be remiss if I didn't start off by asking you about a bigger topic within SEC play. And I know that some of our viewers and listeners would very much want to know this as well. How is Texas A&M processing the fact that old traditional rival Texas is about to be in the SEC next season?
I think for A&M fans at this point, we're now less than a year away from it being reality. More than anything, I think folks are just excited for that game to get played again. I know within the A&M fan base, there was a lot of it was very divided on like whether we should have tried to play that game the past decade. I was someone who I always said I think we never should have stopped playing the game. I was very pro like we need to get this game back every single year. So while there may be other cons to Texas coming into the SEC, getting to actually play that game again is going to be it's obviously huge for A&M fans, huge for Texas fans, and I think just huge for college football. That's it's a huge like bitter rivalry and that's what this sport is founded on. So getting one of those back is certainly never a bad thing. If you want to get into more of the high level conversations of it, a big reason why a lot of A&M fans didn't want Texas in the SEC, I think, is just because we felt like that was kind of A&M's ace in the hole, be it from a recruiting perspective, a financial perspective. It was something that A&M could claim an advantage that Texas didn't have. Texas was, for lack of a better word, kind of wallowing in the Big 12. And to see that go away in some ways kind of sucks. But given everything that's happened in conference realignment, knowing that Texas and Oklahoma were probably going somewhere, I'd rather them be in the SEC where we can still have a chance to play and beat them every year, or at least every other year, depending on how the schedule works out, as opposed to, if they'd gone to the Big Ten, then they still kind of get the big boost from being in a really high profile premier conference, maybe feeling like they're a bit more on a level playing field visibility wise, but then we don't have that opportunity to actually just say, yeah, that's all fine and good, but scoreboard. So, so I mean, so that's going to be, by far the best part, because that game's coming to College Station next year. That's, I'm going to try to be there. I think I have my ticket squared away already. But that's going to be one of those that every A&M fan, every Texas fan is going to try to be there. But ultimately, you've only got 102,000 seats. So that's going to be a hot ticket for sure.
Only 102,000
Yeah.
seats. Like it's just some small drop in the bucket over here. We
Well,
just boosted.
For
boosted
that
up to
game,
88.
for that game, it definitely is.
We just boosted up to 88,000 here at Auburn, and we are, a very loud and very proud 88,000. So when I hear someone say, "Oh, it's just 102," I'm like, "Well, you still got us by a significant margin." I have not had the pleasure to go to Kyle Field yet, and it's my namesake, so that's kind of seems like sacrilegious or something like that. So we'll make that happen at some point in the near future. Happy to have you guys as part of the SEC and Texas and Oklahoma as well. I'm one of those that was very pleased to have them join, and I think it's going to continue to build on what's already a great conference. And the rivalries are obviously a big part of what makes college football great, and having Texas and Texas A&M back in the saddle together, that's going to be real good. I'm excited for it. All right, let's jump into this matchup. That's what we're really here to discuss and kind of hash every single thing out. A lot of people have shared opinions already online. I think a lot of people don't really know a lot what to make of this matchup quite yet, because it could really go either way, I feel like. And I think when I talk to people, that's kind of the perspective that's out there right now. Let's start off with offense, though. I would love for you to give us a little bit of a perspective of what your thoughts on Texas A&M's offense is all about, what they do well, what they don't do well, just kind of some overarching thoughts about that.
Well, I think you have to start the conversation with just the new look offense under Bobby Petrino, because so much of the offseason conversation was whether that hire was going to work out, whether Jimbo was even going to truly relinquish control and actually make significant changes to his offense. And so far, I mean, the answer is undoubtedly yes. You look at Connor Wigman he has one of the top QBRs in the country. He's throwing for 300 yards a game, and that's just stuff that did not happen a season ago. And you can look at, a lot of those stats are coming against inferior competition when you're playing New Mexico and Louisiana Monroe. But you can look at A&M over the past couple of years where even against those type of teams, this team was not putting up prolific offensive numbers. This team was not even passing the eyeball test of saying, you're just kind of doing whatever you want against these teams because that's what you should do. Mm-hmm. So I would say, as far as what the offense actually looks like this year, some of the more noticeable differences are tempo. They're not going like true hurry up, no huddle. It's, it's not like running to the line of scrimmage between plays, but it's much more like, they're snapping the ball with 15, 20 seconds on the clock, as opposed to, it felt like a hallmark of Jimbo's offense in recent years was he was draining it down to like 5 seconds on the clock every time. So you just never felt like you got any sort of rhythm whatsoever to your offense. So a lot more flow to it, but also just very, very pass heavy. And I think, and part of that is obviously by design. Part of that too is I think they're just catering to what they can do well. Because if there is one weakness to this offense, or one thing that just they haven't done maybe quite as well as we would have liked, is you haven't seen a really dominant run game. Mm-hmm. The run game's not getting stuffed. It's not ineffective. But you're not just seeing, huge holes that you could drive a truck through. It's much more like plodding, you're hitting like, 3-yard plays, and then you get the chunk plays to kind of bring that average up. But if there is a place, I think, where you can attack this team and kind of slow down this offense, it's definitely in the run game, because the passing game with Connor Wigman throwing to those wide receivers, be it Evan Stewart, Noah Thomas, Anais Smith, Moose Muhammad, and then you throw in transfer, Grand Valley State transfer of all places, Jade Walker, who had a huge game last week. No shortage of options in that passing game, and they're throwing it downfield. They're airing it out, which is a weird thing to see, but a very welcoming thing to see for A&M fans.
Yeah, you kind of hit some of the big names there I wanted you to talk about already. The quarterback Wigman, and then obviously Anais Smith. How long has he been there at Texas A&M now?
Forever. He's been here since I think it's 2019.
Okay.
Um, because he was actually a guy. He was in kind of Jimbo's first full recruiting class, and he's one of those guys. I feel like there's one of these guys on every team where he was like one of the last players to sign in that 2019 class, and one of those players that, if you're a rival fan, people say, oh, it's like, well, he was only a take because X other player went somewhere else, stuff like that. But Jimbo maintained from the very beginning, he was like, no, he was a take because we wanted him from the get go, and a 3-star recruit, not really highly touted necessarily, but as beginning his true freshman year, made it on the field, and as soon as you saw him on the field, you were like, this guy can play.
Yeah.
So we lost him, in game, I think 4 to injury last year against Arkansas. So certainly having him back for one more season has proven huge dividends, both as a receiver, and he's also our punt returner.
No shortage of talent has arrived at Texas A&M. I think the collective story out there is there's a lot of talent that's been brought in, but maybe hasn't been utilized all that much, or at least consistently during Jimbo's time. That's just the feeling that I get outside looking in. I don't know if that's something that is that you would agree with, that also at Texas A&M fans would agree. Is that something that's fair to say about just kind of the talent that's been brought in versus what's the production's been?
I definitely would, because this is the second year in a row that if you look at those 247 Sports team talent composites, A&M's top 5 in the country. I think they're 3rd in the SEC. And so even if that's a young talent, which last year it very much was, because you had that 2022 number 1 rated recruiting class that brought in a lot of talent as far as those recruiting services are concerned, but they're all true freshmen. But now all those guys are sophomores, so you're running out of excuses, because you've got experience. A&M had the most returning production in the SEC. It's year 6 under Jimbo Fisher, so it's undoubtedly 100% his roster. So I would say absolutely A&M fans are, I'm not going to say impatient, but we're just kind of, the time for waiting is over.
Yeah.
Any like previous seasons where you can maybe explain something away, that's in the past. 5-7 last year happened. I think that erased a lot of goodwill that might have been there otherwise. And so I think fans are ready to say, no, like, this is the year. Like, you've got all the things in place. There's no reason this shouldn't be a good to potentially great team. So it's time to go prove it.
Auburn has a lot of history with Bobby Petrino as an offensive coordinator, and for a long time always seemed like he was just waiting in the wings to potentially become a head coach. I have my own personal feelings about that, and I'm personally glad that didn't happen at the time, but I am not going to take away from the man his offensive genius. And so if you can combine that with Jimbo and it works more consistently, you guys could be in for a very good run here at Texas A&M. Personally, obviously hoping that run doesn't start this week, but what can you do? Very impressed though that you guys were able to bring him in and to see what happens. So be watching for names like Wigman, obviously the quarterback, and Anais Smith. Let's talk about defense. What do the Tigers need to know about Texas A&M on defense?
Well, if there is a weakness on this team, it's definitely is on the defensive side, which once again, strange thing to say as an A&M fan, because that's, really ever since Jimbo's been here, the defense has been the calling card. And in particular, I would say the two aspects that A&M has really struggled with, and they kind of go in hand, is producing a consistent pass rush and secondary. Yeah, and really, and all this, that we're talking about, the pass rush has been a little bit of an issue in all of the games, but really, it all comes down to what we saw versus Miami, because that was A&M's really only true test that we faced so far, and ultimately a test that they did not live up to. Because I think Tyler Van Dyke threw for over 340, 350 yards. They had 274 yards after contact.
Wow.
In receiving. It was, I'm sorry, not after contact, yards after catch.
Yeah.
But so there were some really rough edges in that Miami game. So stuff that, it's not necessarily that it's not fixable, but it definitely, shows this is not a finished product. So if you're a team that's looking at how you can take advantage of that defense, I think absolutely you say like, look, we think we can throw the ball on them, and we're going to make them prove that they can stop us throwing the ball. Because run defense actually, which was the Achilles heel of this team a year ago, run defense has been really stout. Really, zero complaints there. But pass defense, there's been some issues, whether it's just straight up coverage or just tackling in the secondary, that I think could potentially trip this team up.
Yeah, I think when I hear your assessment of this team and this defense, it's sounding to me a lot like what Auburn just got done playing last week. Sanford was extremely pass heavy. A pass heavy defense. I'm getting all confused now. Their offense was very pass heavy, and our strength is the defensive backs. And you could see that kind of be playing out throughout the game. But what was also interesting to see how often Auburn on offense was throwing the ball and how deliberate and persistent they were. So I got to think at times it was confounding to Auburn fans during that game, how often they were throwing the ball against Sanford. I got to think that that's what they're preparing for this week against the defense of Texas A&M, if that is the weak point. And, as you kind of pointed out with the whole matchup so far, Miami is the only true test that they have faced thus far, and Auburn's only true test is California. I think we can all look at that pretty objectively and say Miami was the tougher opponent of the two right there. We're not going to argue that point. But at the same time, we won't know how both those two teams shake out until everything gets done this season. But right now, I think we can obviously say Texas A&M is the more battle-tested defense as of this point. Is it going to be enough to hold up some of Auburn's new weapons that they have, especially at the wide receiver and tight end position? Rivaldo Fairweather, new tight end out of FIU, is absolute beast and showed out in the last game and has been doing that more and more throughout the first 3 games. So I definitely think that's an area that Auburn's going to have to attack for you guys. I am concerned that your guys' rush defense has improved, because that, as we pointed out in our discussion in the article, was an area of maybe not concern, but I'm ready for Auburn's run game to get going. And so that may be something that if Texas A&M can continue to be dominant in, as maybe they have been so far this season, you'll find some success. Any other players or anything on defense that Auburn should be listening for names-wise?
Defense, biggest names I would call out is Shamar Turner, who's a third-year defensive end, former 5-star guy. I mean, just like half that defensive line is, honestly. But he's leading the team in sacks, and he's not one of those lean, long, fast edge players. He's just very much just bull rush. He'll just bowl the tackle over and get to the quarterback type guy. But yeah, I mean, really. The other name I threw out there is Edgerrin Cooper, who's a senior linebacker, a guy who I think this is his 3rd year starting now. So it's very much very experienced, but I think up until this season, people felt like he really hadn't taken that next step, hadn't made that jump that maybe you hoped that he would. Mm-hmm. And granted, I'm not an X's and O's guys. I'm not studying film or anything, but he's really jumped out this year as a guy, especially in run support, which I think was a weak spot with the linebackers last year. He's been really rock solid, and so I would say definitely feels like we've seen an improvement in his play so far this year, and I would say after game 1, if you had asked me of names to look at, I would have said Josh DeBerry, who's a transfer corner. But then he had a rough game against Miami, just like all of our corners did. And then he actually was out against New Mexico. So still kind of TBD of whether or not he's going to be in there at all this coming week. And that was one thing, A&M against Monroe last week, they had 2 or 3 corners out, and they were without their top 2 wide receivers. So it's, and also we did not have our starting center, and one of our starting tackles went down in the game. Right. And Jimbo, in his press conference this week, he said they should be good to go, but it was one of those where he sounded very non-committal, as if saying, "Oh, they should be," but but we'll see as the week goes on. So I mean, you talked a little bit about how, Auburn missing a few of y'all's key players.
Mhm.
It's not a foregone conclusion that A&M's not missing some guys as well.
Yeah, it does always seem to happen about this time for the first set of games. You're starting to see maybe even if they're not serious injuries, and there are some for Auburn that have now been eliminated completely from the equation indefinitely, but they're starting to creep up. People are starting to get dinged up, and that, it's very unfortunate to be happy when Texas A&M and Auburn are about to collide together in what's going to be a mega matchup. Unfortunately, it's really early in the morning. I don't like that. I don't know how you guys feel about that. We are definitely nighttime people here in Auburn. We love those type of games. I can imagine it's a little bit more comfortable in the evening times at Kyle Field. So special teams, anything to keep in mind there? I would imagine Anaya Smith is probably a big factor in special teams punt returns.
Yep, yeah. So Anaya Smith always dangerous on the punt return. Kickoffs. Our primary kick returner this year has been Ruben Owens, who's a 5-star freshman running back. And I will say, A&M's running back is really, it's kind of a 3-headed monster between Ruben Owens, Amari Daniels, and Le'Veon Moss. But Owens, I feel like, is starting to flash. He's starting to show why he was one of the top running backs in the country last year. And because he makes plays, whether it's he makes a guy miss or he'll make a one-handed catch. And you're starting to see, I think, those flashes that he may eventually take over that job. But he's also pretty good in the return game just because he's kind of a long strider, a little bit more so than you normally see in a running back. So he can, when he hits a seam, in that kick return game, he can be pretty dangerous. As far as kickers and punters, I mean, I think our guys are good. I'm not going to I don't think we need to break down kicking and punting, but it's not a liability, I would say.
Yeah. I did notice that your punter has at least one, if not a couple of 50-yard punts. So I am a special teams guy because I was a kicker in high school. So I always peek in just to kind of see. I know it's not the most important notes to everybody, but I saw him over there. I was looking at a couple of notes from the last game for him. Either way.
Sorry. And the last game, he only had one punt and he killed it inside the one. So.
Yeah, I saw that.
Mission accomplished.
I saw that one. But yeah, obviously there's weapons to be had, at least on punt returns and kick returns. And we know that. We've talked about it already. Texas A&M is full of talent. Let's just hope for the Tigers' sake that maybe, just maybe, that talent takes a break for one game. I know you guys aren't hoping that, but those that are probably watching this for the most part are hoping that talent does not arise up to where the potential definitely is. So this brings us to the moment here. And I will ask you this, what's your score prediction? But if you're not ready to give an official prediction, you can just kind of give me what the game you anticipate how to hash out or who's going to win, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah. I mean, like you kind of said at the beginning, I feel like it's a hard one to predict because we are still at that point in the season where we're all still figuring out exactly what our team is and exactly what our ceiling is. And, A&M went to Miami and looked good in stretches, but ultimately did not look like the better team in that game. And we're still figuring out, is that because is Miami actually really good? Or are they like an ACC title contender? Or is A&M still kind of, sitting here wallowing in mediocrity? And we're going to look back at that game and say, well, yeah, we lost, we were the inferior team against a team that wasn't even that good anyway. And so I feel like this is just that next step in figuring out what this team is. And for A&M, I think it really is the offense we feel like is a known quantity. The offense is going to be pretty darn good. It's just a matter of if the defense can do enough and fix those previous issues and, not make it too hard on the offense to actually give ourselves a shot. And once again, that's such a weird thing to say for an A&M fan because last year it was the exact opposite where, the defense, while it wasn't perfect, I think it still ended up in scoring defense. They were about 25th in the country. So still relatively pretty solid. And then you had an offense that's outside the top 100. And then we come back right now, A&M's 12th in the country in scoring offense, and the defense is what has held us back so far. So throw your hands up on that one. But just as for this game in particular, as an A&M fan, I feel like you have to be optimistic in this game because it's a first year coach with Hugh Freeze. a lot of new faces. They're still kind of figuring things out. You do have a couple of key injuries that really make things even harder on you guys. It is at Kyle Field. I know now, granted, in this series, home field hasn't always meant that much.
Right.
But in a vacuum for this one game, you still have to think that gives A&M a little bit of a leg up. And so I lean towards, I'm optimistic on A&M winning only because I think I'm not ready to accept the fact that if we lose to Auburn, who else are we going to lose to? Yeah. And I don't mean that as a knock to you guys.
No, I know exactly what you mean.
But it's, if we lose this game, like then you move into your SEC schedule where you play Arkansas. The week after that is Alabama. The week after that is Tennessee. The week after that is a bye week. But then you get into like your rest of your Ole Miss, LSU, Mississippi State, South Carolina. So it's that first one, and if you can get this first one and get that win, then you can talk yourself into winning the next one, and then you can talk yourself into winning the next one. But you lose this one, and that hope starts to fade for sure.
It does seem like both are in pressure cooker situations, just on the opposite end. If Auburn goes into Kyle Field and wins, that's kind of like, oh wow, we're better than we thought we were. But if Texas A&M somehow drops the game, it becomes this situation of, like you said, what else is going to happen? And I don't take that as a slight against Auburn, because I try my best to take off the orange and blue glasses and be a little bit perspective based and understand where we're at least from what we know. So that makes complete sense to me. Yeah.
So, I mean, if I'm making a score prediction, and I was thinking about this earlier, I think I'll say 31-24, because I do think I think both offenses are going to have the ability to score points, and so I think it's not going to be a big defensive battle, and so that's like, it's, if nothing else, it hits the over and A&M covers the spread. So I think everybody would be happy with that.
I was about to say, I was looking just real quick. I peeked at it, what the over under was, and I was like, you are right on it, sir.
Yeah.
You saw in my prediction that I'm anticipating the under. And, part of that is because of Auburn's defense, what they've shown so far, even with some injuries. And, I just got to believe, I know that you said that Texas A&M's defense has been maybe what's been holding it back in some ways, but it's at home, Kyle Field, first SEC game. I got to feel that 12th man is going to really play a factor, especially on defense, for an Auburn team that's really still trying to find its footing and where it stands this year. So either way, we've got predictions on the board, perspectives of the game, and a look across the sideline. And it's been fun kind of catching up with you to talk about what maybe to anticipate this Saturday as SEC plays begin. As we head out, I'd love to give you an opportunity to kind of talk about what you do and share anything that you'd like. Plug away, sir.
Yeah. So as you mentioned at the top of the episode, I write for goodbullhunting.com, which is Texas A&M's SB Nation team site. I'm also the managing editor over there. And then if you want to find me beyond that, just on social media, I'm pretty active on Twitter. You can find me, as it says right over here, at RCB05.
Excellent. So do check that out. Obviously, we will see Texas A&M in other sports as well throughout the athletic calendar year. So this is not the first time and only the last time you need to be checking in with Robert over here at SB Nation and Good Bull Hunting. Robert, thank you so much for catching up with us and talking a little bit of football, and excited to see what happens and whose predictions may be right by the end of this thing.
Yeah. Well, I hope we're both right.
Right, exactly. We'll find a way to do it. I mean, surely there's a way it can all happen, right?
Yeah. But yeah, man, very much appreciated. So enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much for being here, and we appreciate you all listening today. Until we talk to you guys again, War Eagle and
Yegum.